Hey, Cider Crusaders. This came up on the show yesterday, usage rates. So usage rate is how many vaccines a state has and how many of them are actually being put into people's arms. And California, where I live, is the worst of all the states. We're at like 38%, I think, of the vaccines that we have, we're actually putting into people's arms. And no state is really doing a great job of this, quite frankly. So what's the breakdown here? What's the problem? What's happening here? Why aren't we distributing this vaccine way quicker, especially when other countries like Israel, population 8 million, but at least, they got almost everyone vaccinated right now. One of our favorite guests, C. Kennedy, is here. He is a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group. What's up, C. Kennedy? How are you, man?
Doing good, Mike. How you doing, bud?
Good. So define the problem here for us. What's the issue that people are scratching their heads about?
Well, initially it was a situation where the question was how do we get vaccines off the docks of Pfizer and Moderna's manufacturing facilities as fast as possible and get them out to the states, and everybody kind of focused on that problem. What we're finding the real bottleneck is a very human bottleneck, and that really kind of comes in two flavors. First is how are states individually taking the CDC guidance and criteria that rolled out for the phase 1A, phase 1B, phase 2, and phase 3, and interpreting that at the state level. That has an enormous bearing on the second human, sort of human bottleneck or choke point, which is a word I've routinely abused, which is once we've identified where the people are that need to be vaccinated, do the facilities that we would intend to service them have the infrastructure in place, and particularly the people, qualified caregivers that know how to do injections, do we have enough of those? And that continues to be an issue we see pretty much across the United States. A little over 40, I've got it written down here, 41.4 million vaccines have been distributed as of yesterday's data dump to the CDC, and only 22.7 have actually been administered. So just a little over half of the doses that have gone out from Pfizer and from Moderna have actually made it to arms so far. Given the cold chain requirements on these things, that's a pretty alarmingly low percentage, especially since this whole thing was conceived as kind of a just-in-time supply chain, as opposed to we're going to have to store these things for a long time while we figure out how to make injections happen.
So it's really interesting. Let's celebrate, first of all, the last time we talked about the logistical hurdles of getting them off of the docks and out of the manufacturing facilities into airplanes around the country and world. Like, that's an amazing achievement of logistics that seems to be successful. But you're right, it's that last mile, which is always the most expensive and most difficult, and as you said, most human, perhaps. Okay, so let's solve this. Instead of whining about it, what is your solution?
So it's really sort of a four-part thing. The first would be to re-involve the military at, I think, a larger scale. Now, some of the states have called up the National Guard. They've got them doing injections, in some cases storage and distribution. But what we have here is kind of this very scattershot approach at the state level. Now, under ideal circumstances, that federalist approach works very, very well. But there's a reason that we have the National Response Framework and NIMS to handle high-speed, fast-developing crisis-type events. A pandemic in this case is not as high speed, but it is something that is somewhat akin to a hurricane hitting across the whole United States and just kind of sitting for a year. So following more of a federalized framework to get down to the final mile would be the start. So my proposal would involve taking several key military bases that are part of the Strategic Highway Network and utilizing those as regional distribution and storage hubs. If you look at a map of a 600-mile radius of each of these bases, it neatly overlaps with about 100% of the United States population. And you would have every single person in the United States, or at least in the continental 48, would have primary and secondary overlapping coverage from any of these bases. So first would be, let's quit trying to run a just-in-time operation to 100 cities based on this very sort of hazy, fast-moving guidelines that are being issued from the states in terms of who's getting vaccinated and when. Let's get the product off the docks to the manufacturers and get them closer to the people who actually need them, as opposed to just trying to run them through the UPS and FedEx networks, globally.
Wow, that was deep and insightful. I want more of that. Like, subscribe, get more.